Um, okay, so this part is we went over. Okay, so now we'll talk about the exclamation mark, or what we call the bang operator. The bang operator basically is a way for us to coerce a value into a boolean. That's the opposite of what it currently is. That's why sometimes in other languages like Python it's called the not operator, the not operator, right? So if on line 4, for example, on inside the console log, well, my initial boolean value is a true value, true. That's true. So what's the bang? Where was the opposite of true? That's false. The string ABC, is that a truthy value or a falsy value? Well, it's a non-empty string, so it's a truthy value, and therefore the opposite of that is going to be a falsy value. Similarly, for number 100, that's a true number, and then the opposite of that is going to be a false number. Or sorry, it's going to be a false. So therefore, the bang of 100 is going to give you false. And then arrays and objects are inherently all truthy. So the opposite of that is going to give you a falsy. And so the exclamation mark before any value is just going to give you the opposite Boolean value. The opposite Boolean value of that value. So the opposite of any value that's a truthy value is going to be false, and the opposite of any falsy value is going to be a true. Now, where it gets sometimes a little bit more confusing if you try to think through it too logically is this, what we call the double bang operator. Double bang operator, as uncreatively as it is kind of called, is it's just two exclamation marks. And what it does is it coerces a value to the opposite value of its opposite value. So the not. And if you think about it that way, you're going to give yourself a headache. So the easiest way to think about a double bang operator is it's the exact same thing as coercing something into a Boolean. Okay. You can remove all the knots because the two knots kind of cancel themselves out. And so on line 4 there, when I do a bang bang true, that's what's the opposite of the opposite of true? That's going to be a true, right? That's effectively the same thing as just coercing something into a Boolean. So on line 6, what's the Boolean of a string ABC? Well, it's a truthy string. What's the Boolean value of number 100? That's a truthy number. Similarly for an array and an object too. And so whereas the single bang operator gives you the opposite, double bang operator just gives you the inherently Boolean value of that value. Any questions here?
It sort of seems like redundant though, right? Is there a situation you need to use that?
Yeah, it's actually a lot of times it's just like a shorthand for converting something into a Boolean.
Oh, thank you.
Yep. Not the greatest reason, but it's the reason.
So you want to convert it into a Boolean, but like I don't know. So I kind of like was with him. Like, what would you use that for?
um, yeah, I mean, if you're trying to convert something into a Boolean, then that's just like a really handy way for you to do it. I don't know. I guess in some ways you'd be surprised at how lazy sometimes programmers are. Sometimes you just don't want to type out the full Boolean, and you just put an exclamation mark in front of it. And sometimes, kind of from a little bit more of a practical sense, is you're actually trying to change a value you don't quite know what it is, and so you may have a bang in front of it. But then at some point you also need it to be a Boolean, and so you just add the extra bang just to convert it back. It is a Boolean coercion, and so the question is more like, do you want to type out the word Boolean and the parentheses, or do you want to just put two exclamation marks in front of it? And the exclamation marks are definitely shorter, even though functionally they do the same exact thing.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep. Okay, and so the last two things we'll talk about today are going to be what we call logical operators. Logical operators also coerce values into Boolean values, but what the thing about them that makes it a little bit different is they actually do it sequentially. And so what does that mean? Well, so here on line 3, I have this conditional statement that says if 10 and 20, and I put in my conditional, right? The and operator in this case is indicated by two ampersands. And if that's true, then I console log out this thing. So how does this work exactly? Well, we're gonna take a look at two logical operators. One of which is this double ampersand called an and the other one is gonna be a double pipe symbol, which we call an or. Okay. So and the reason why I skip over the last slide is I actually think this slide probably just covers everything we need to know about the and operator. What the and operator does is it will return back. It's something that's used to chain together multiple things that you're checking. And what it will do is it will actually return back the first falsy value or it will give you back the last value if everything is truthy. So let's take a look at an example, okay? Here, before we even look at the code, right, just imagine in common English what we use the word and for. If I say, I'm trying to bake a cake, I need you to go to the store and get me milk and eggs and flour, okay? If you come back with just two or one of those three things, it's no good for me because I can't bake a cake because I don't have all the things I need, right? So whenever we see an AND operator, what it's really saying is, hey, everything in my sequence has to be true in order for me to overall give you back a true value. And so here on line 4, I have this variable called return value, and I start with looking at something called 10 and the string apples. And so going from left to right, the question becomes, okay, is the first thing, is that true? Because if it's not true, I can just stop right there, right? It's like me asking you to get me milk, eggs, and flour, and you come back and say, hey, I didn't get the milk. Well, at that point, I don't need to know if you got the eggs, the flour, or not, because I already know that you've quote unquote failed, right? I don't have enough ingredients to make the cake. And so here, we start by checking each thing one at a time. We do it from left to right, but as soon as we hit the first false value, we stop and we give back and say, hey, look, I found a false value. I found a quote unquote a break in the chain. That means nothing else really matters. And so here on line 4, if I start with 10, is that a truthy value? Yeah, it is. Okay, great. Let's use a double ampersand. We see the double ampersand. We check the next thing, which is a string apples. Is that truthy? Yeah, it's truthy. It's a non-empty string. Great. Let's check the next thing. Next thing, the number 0. Is that truthy? No, the number 0 is a falsy value. And so the AND operator stops right there and says, here, let me give you back the value of 0. That tells me two things. One is I didn't make it to the end of my list because I came across at least one thing that was not truthy. And then secondly is the first truthy thing that I found was 0. Notice how I didn't even check the force thing. I didn't even check the null. And that's because I don't need to, right? I know there's at least a 0 in front of it that's falsy. And so whether or not null is truthy or falsy doesn't really matter to me. I've already kind of, quote unquote, like broken this chain, if you will. And so on the other hand, on line 7 there, if I try to take a look at this chain, the first thing I check is the string lucky and say, is that true or is that false? And it's a non-empty string, so it's true. Okay, next thing I check, the string number. Is that true or false? Well, it's a non-empty string, so it's truthy. Great. The next thing I check, the number 7. Is that truthy or falsy? Well, it's a non-zero number, so it's truthy. Great. And at that point, I return back 7. And when I see that 7, what that tells me is I've gone through every single list in this sequence, or every single item in this sequence, and I did not hit across any false values, and the last true value that I got was 7. And so on the first example, when I return back the value, I get back a 0 because that was the first falsy value that I found. And then in the second example, I return back a 7 because that was the first true, or that was the last truthy value that I encountered. Everyone good?
Yep.
Hillary? Fatale?
Yeah, I'm good.
All good, sorry.
Awesome. Okay, so then the opposite of AND is OR, right? And here in JavaScript, just notice we write the OR with these two vertical lines. They're called pipe symbols. On your keyboard, they're usually located right underneath the backspace key or the delete key in the top right-hand corner. And so what OR says is, if I say, hey, I need to get some dessert for dinner tonight, right? Could you go to the store and get me a cake or ice cream, or fruit? Well, I don't need all three. I just need at least one of those things and I'm good, right? And that's kind of the intuition behind OR as well, is OR will go through this list of things to check. And if it finds the first true value it finds, it just says, great, I'm done. You need at least one true, and I found it for you. I don't need to check anything else. Or if nothing is true and it goes to the very end of the list, it will give you back the last false value. And so here on line 4, if we look at the first example, the first thing we look at is the value of null. Is that true or false? Well, null is a falsy value, so we go to the next value. Undefined. Is that true or false? That's also a falsy value, so we go to the next value. Happy. The string happy. Is that true or false? That's true, right? And it's a non-empty string, so it's a truthy value. And then we stop right there and say, great, I found at least one truthy value, the first one. That's all I need from you. And we're done there. Here on line 7, we do the same thing. False. Is that a falsy value or a truthy value? Well, clearly it's a falsy value. No, falsy value. What about this third one? 10 is less than 0. Well, 10 is not less than 0, so it's a mathematically false statement. So that's also a falsy value. And the last thing is this NaN, which stands for not a number. That's also a falsy value. And so then when we look at the return value, for the first example, we're going to get back the string happy, which means we found at least one true value. And on the second example, we get back NaN, which is a falsy value. And that tells us, hey, we went through the entire list, could not find any truthy values. And so we give you back the falsy value, the last falsy value we encountered. Everyone still good?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. So that's all we had today, right? So just kind of give you guys a quick recap. On the types, we looked at primitive versus complex data types. And once again, primitive just means you can't change the value. You can only replace it. Complex, you're able to change it. Once again, we have a whole class dedicated to this, so don't stress too much about it right now. We talked about implicit and explicit coercion. Explicit coercion is actually very, as the name indicates, very clear, very explicit, very transparent. We actually named the class we're trying to change something to. Implicit happens in a variety of ways. Sometimes we use a plus sign. It can change numbers to strings if we're adding together different data types. Sometimes in a conditional statement, it will actually even just convert everything into a Boolean on our behalf. And when we talk about Boolean coercion, values all fall into either truthy or falsy values, which all that means is if I convert to a Boolean, is it going to be true or is it going to be false? We talked a little bit about the bang and the double bang operators, which just gives you the opposite or the opposite Boolean values. And then lastly, we ended up talking about the logical operators, which are the ands, which go through the entire list of values and tries to make sure that everything is true, or the or operator, which goes through the list and tries to find at least one true value. So are there any questions about any of those topics before we get started on the workshop?
For the double equal sign, or
Yep.
the loose operator, that would be like if I had the string of 10 and in the number 10, it would then be like true because they're both the same. If I added the bang operator in front of the loose equality operator, would that be like these are two different things, so it's false?
Well, bang equal means not equal. So it just converts across. That will compare across both value and type.
Okay.
So essentially, just note that the rule of thumb here is that you always want to be as precise as possible. And for this cohort, and really in life in general, you almost never want to use double equals unless you have a very, very specific design in mind. You almost always want to use triple equals.
Okay.
And once again, the reason for that is because you want to minimize JavaScript making coercions for you on your behalf without your knowledge.
Perfect. Yeah, I didn't even know it would do that. So that's
Yeah. Well, maybe we shouldn't have told you, and you would never have used it. But now that we've told you and we told you not to use it, I feel like it becomes a little more enticing, if nothing else. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Well, let me stop the share, and then we will get underway for our